In this section, we're going to cover some of the pitfalls that you might encounter as you think about what feedback to incorporate into your product or service. And this is going to happen throughout the journey of the development of your product and service. And even after it gets implemented and you start to grow and scale, you'll continuously get this kind of feedback on your product. And as the feedback gets large, as your audience gets larger and your user base gets larger, then you'll just even get more feedback. So here are some things to consider. One is just you can't react to every piece of bad feedback, right? Like there will be some contradictory feedback along the way. And so if you react to everyone, then you're just going to swing the pendulum. Forgetting that feedback is free, and that's an important thing to remember because sometimes you might get feedback and people just don't want to hurt your feelings, and so they give you a little bit more kind of polished feedback, and that does happen a lot. So we don't want you to forget about that. And then ignoring the bias of your source, right? Like in the beginning, especially when you're reaching out, you're going to be reaching out to people that have commonalities to you most of the time. And so as a result, you're going to see some biases and often some positive reinforcement. And then finally, as you take all of this feedback, I think it's important that you think about features that increase adoption of your product or service, increase the implementation and usage. Imagine when you were working at a school as an administrator or principal or even a teacher, you got a lot of feedback in your classroom from parents, from your peers. Imagine if you reacted to every piece of feedback you got. I think in the beginning it may make sense, and then over time you're going to get contradictory feedback, and a lot of times the best way to get through some of that is just through self-reflection and getting to know yourself. And the same thing is true for the product or service that you're developing. You'll get a lot of constructive feedback, and sometimes you might just overcorrect towards one particular area because you have, see a lot of value in the feedback that a particular person provided, or they may be an expert in this space. But you could imagine like other companies like a Netflix, right? Like they get a ton of feedback from customers around pricing, around the type of film, the makeup of the films that they develop. And with all of that feedback, they're always trying to process, their direction, but they can't overreact or overgyrate on every single person's individual feedback and complaints. So what you really need to do is figure out what's the feedback that's going to help drive your product or service towards the end goal that you envision, and then stay on that. You make sure that you're feeding the right feedback into your product or service development along the way. Think about the last time a friend asked you for feedback on something, and it could have been something about their handling of a situation, or maybe they had an idea and maybe you thought that it wasn't the greatest idea, but you still gave the person feedback, and you probably did it in a nicer way. That's the kind of feedback that you can expect initially from the people that you reached out to that's within your network, because the feedback is free, and actually it probably just costs them more if they piss you off along the way or hurt your feelings. And so you're going to get feedback initially that is less critical and maybe sometimes less informative for you. And so you need to learn how to kind of parse that out. When you do use tools like surveys and stuff, it does allow you to provide or get more objective feedback, especially if that feedback is anonymous. But also you got to couple that with direct feedback through interviews and open-ended questions that you might use, because just getting that anonymous feedback sometimes is hard to figure out how to follow through on some of the things and how to get deeper in some of the questions that you might have as you analyze that feedback. When you ask people for feedback or their opinion, it's inevitable that some of their biases and interests come through in the feedback that you receive. And so as you think about the different folks that you're going to reach out to, the first thing to make sure is that you want to be cautious of confirmation bias, right? It's easy for you to reach out to, let's say you're developing a leadership coaching solution, and you reach out to all your district administrator friends that all had struggled with leadership coaching, and everybody thinks that that's a great idea. And so there's a bit of confirmation bias because you're reaching out to people that have seen the problem, and maybe the underlying problem that you're not really addressing is that while people recognize that coaching is necessary, most people don't make the time, or within the workday, you just don't have the time. And so while you'll get like confirmation that the problem is there, I don't think sometimes you run into the situation where you get that the underlying problem why it doesn't get adopted, and that's what you're really trying to solve for as you kind of unpack what your product or service might be. The other challenge I think is over kind of the evolution of your from your prototype to your early adopters to kind of your beta rollout to the general rollout, whether it's a product or service. What you're going to run into is a little bit of confirmation bias based off of your particular subgroup within all of those stages. For example, in the early stages when you're working with your early adopters, they're more excited about the innovative aspects, and they're more accepting of some of the other underdeveloped features within a product or service. And so because of the innovation, they're excited about it, and that might draw them to doing and continuing to support the product or service. Whereas as you shift towards people that are in the early majority, for example, uh, they will want some of the just the basics components and the expected components that exist across all of the products in the category or services in the category as a default, right? And so just trying to understand like the evolution of the audience that you're serving and figuring out what are the elements of your product or service that need to be available as you progress through kind of the stages of the adoption curve. I think this is going to be one of the hardest pitfalls for educators to overcome. And part of it is because it's closeness to sales. And I'm going to put it in this framing, right? First, you got to focus on features that catalyze change in behavior. Regardless of what it is, whether it's a product or service, most schools, for example, already have some sort of leadership plan, right? And so what you're trying to do is if you're offering a service around leadership, you got to change their behavior and get them to stop doing what they're doing and bring what you're doing, because you just can't add another service on top of everything. If it's a product, then they might already have a similar product. And so you're also having to displace something else. And so it's a change of behavior. And you have to understand why they're going to want to make that change. What's the compelling reason they're going to want to make that change? The other is any kind of feedback that you try to implement, just make sure that you're intentional, that it's going to result in some sort of change that will allow for more adoption, because you're not going to be able to improve your product without getting it implemented, whether it's a product or service. The more it's implemented, the more feedback you're going to get, and the faster you're going to be able to improve it and make greater impact. And then finally, again, just to reinforce that sales will improve your product. You could invest in it, you could get more people to use it, you could see the results, and you could understand what you need to change over a longer period of time to make it even better to get the impact that you want. For this lesson, just start analyzing the feedback that you've collected. See if you need more feedback or if you need to get more diverse feedback, but then start to bucket like the clear next steps. I want you to sort out some of the things that will kind of drive the change and the unique value proposition and the sales and adoption that we talked about. Put them in the community and see how other people react. By sharing, you might get some new ideas, and you'll also give others some ideas. And then just prioritize the improvements you want to make, and let's see what that looks like.